Well, the former editor-in-chief, now publisher of the Myanmar Times, Ross Dunkley, joined me just a short time ago from Bangkok. Ross Dunkley, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, after all the time you spent in jail and all the time fighting those charges, what's the state of play now? Do you still have any editorial control over the Myanmar Times?
Oh yes, I'm still the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, of the English edition, and I'm still the managing director of the company, and I've now regained my multiple entry visa status, so it seems as though I'm back to normal.
Sort of. I mean, the last time we heard you'd beaten all the charges but one, the charge of simple hurt. What does that mean? Well,
I think the definition of simple hurt could be that if you touched someone's hand merely in passing, or had shaken someone's hand, then that could be classified technically as such. So it's a rather vague charge, and one which the authorities occasionally like to use.
Is it still hanging over your head? That's my point.
Well, I have an appeal, ongoing appeal on this charge, on this conviction, and with it a conviction on an immigration offence. And so I'm appealing that, and I'm hoping for justice on it.
Now, in the documentary, one of your colleagues says there's no doubt the incident with the girl was a setup by someone in power. Is that what you believe?
Oh, look, there's many different rumours that float around about that, but there can be no doubt that someone was trying to interfere in the process. I think it's too much of a coincidence to assume otherwise.
The same colleague also says you're not a saint. I imagine you wouldn't quibble with that.
Well, you know, who is a saint in this world? And perhaps that my life is probably just a little bit more obvious than others who tend to keep a lot of their life underneath or nice and quiet and away from any limelight. And my life is out in the open, so I guess you get warts and all.
Yeah. Did you run a little close to the wind, do you think? I mean, is that what happened in a very difficult environment?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that I've always played a fairly disciplined approach in Myanmar, knowing that this is a very delicate place to operate in. I mean, I knew from a long time ago, well before I was arrested, that there were people out to get me. There was no doubt about that. I saw that coming.
Who was out to get you?
Well, the authorities, certainly my minister was not happy with me, and had written to me saying that I was a person no longer to be trusted by the government, and I was rather astounded at that accusation after more than 12 years of living in the country.
Now, we see you filmed in handcuffs after your arrest. We see you being shuffled in and out of cells and into prison vans. And actually, to be honest, you certainly show grace under pressure, smiling and joking under these circumstances. What was it actually like to spend 47 days in Burma's worst prison?
Well, I don't consider it that bad. I liken it more to being on a cadet camp when I was a younger boarding school student in Western Australia. Is that I didn't see it as harsh at all. Is that I was well known, that everyone looked after me, from the prison officers through down to the common prisoners. Everyone thought that I was rather hard done by.
What were the conditions like, though? I mean, did you have a cell to your own? Or, I mean, apparently there's incredible overcrowding in that prison. Well,
they say there's some 9,500 or 10,000 prisoners inside insane prison. In my cell block, there was nine rooms, each room about 110 people. So that's more than 1,000 people per block. So is it crowded? Yes, I think that you've probably got no more than a couple of square metres, enough to lie down with your bedding at night time, and otherwise, you're pretty crowded up together in what is fairly hot circumstances.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like cadet camp the way you put it there.
Oh, look, I was a jackaroo when I was younger, and I think that was a little bit harder sometimes. And I also ran some marathons, and that was considerably harder than being in a prison cell.
How many of the people you were locked away with were political dissidents and opponents of the regime?
I think in my block of 1,000 people, there was probably about 10 that were in there on political convictions. In the whole of the prison, maybe there was 100 or more, but I would never be able to see really the extent of that, because a lot of the more senior people were in their own particular compound, away from the rest of the rank and file prisoners.
Now, your friend, the journalist Jeffrey Goddard, has an interesting take on what happened to you. He thinks you pushed the edge of the envelope too hard, and you forgot that you're an outsider in Myanmar. What do you say to that?
Well, I've had some very senior people inside the government say that I am Myanmar. I am just as Myanmar as they're Myanmar. So I think that would prove Jeffrey wrong instantly. Did I push the envelope too far? How could I have pushed the envelope too far when I'm standing up for my 350 staff, when I'm wanting things to happen? I'm wanting to see the company run the best it can be, and I want to do things the way that I see, as transparent and open, and it's good for all parties. Now, when that doesn't happen, yes, I will push the envelope, because I have no choice as a CEO of the company. I've got to do the best job I can.
Let's talk about the fact that you were there for such a long time under an incredibly repressive regime. Were you making a kind of pact with the devil when you tried to publish a newspaper under the thumb of a repressive military dictatorship?
Look, I'd gone from spending 7 years in Hanoi, where I was dealing with a bunch of fairly hardline communists, still very much the leftovers from the Vietnam War, and so it was pretty hardcore. And coming to Yangon and to deal with some people from the military government there, I thought was fairly easy and a lot more smoother than I anticipated it to be. I wasn't jumping into bed with anyone. I understand what you're saying, but you couldn't do real journalism, could you? I mean, you'd have to agree that military censors would run their red pen through anything that resembled real journalism or the truth. I mean, you can see that through the documentary. Every time you try and publish something that's evidently true, they cross it out if they don't agree with it. Well, I don't make the rules, and all I did was decide to get onto the playing field. And I think you have to be there at the very minimum to be able to institute change. Now, I've said this many times before. There's no use shrieking from the sidelines, because you can't score a goal no matter what, no matter how much yelling you do. It's only when you're on the field that you've got a chance to influence the game. Now, people can say, "Oh, you had no chance with them because they had the red pen out at all times." Well, maybe sometimes the red pen was put away on occasions when perhaps it should have been out, and I think that was the ability of our staff to push the envelope forward and to train people about the role of media.
But how do you influence the game in a situation like that when you can't actually tell the truth?
We've always attempted to tell the truth, and we've always told the story as we see it, and then the censors cut it. We don't alter our copy or alter our articles because of the censor. We only write as we see it, and then if the red pen comes out, it has to run like that.
Well, you could just say, I'm not going to publish the newspaper because they're not letting us publish the truth.
Well, you could take your bat and ball and go home like a child, but I think that by being mature, by being patient, and by just being there week after week after week, I think you generally tend to lift the bar. It's only incremental, and it's only a little bit, but every time you do it, it's a small victory for you. That's not to say that it doesn't hurt. Every time someone puts the red pen and crosses out the story, it's like a knife in your guts. That feeling doesn't go away.
I mean, you could argue the other way, though, couldn't you? I mean, your case could also show that cozying up to repressive regimes is both morally compromising and dangerous. Certainly your partner has ended up in jail for 14 years. You ended up in jail, and no one seemed to be able to do anything about reporting what was really going on in that 2010 election, where it was clearly rigged, according to your own observations, and yet you couldn't even say so.
Well, I don't know about cozying up to anyone. I mean, that's simply incorrect. I mean, I don't think we cozy up to anyone. My contact with the senior members of the military government was minimal. I mean, I had no friendships inside the government at all. So I operated almost completely independently. And to say that my partner was as well would be completely incorrect as well, because he wasn't even an editorial official. He had nothing to do with the decision on what went in the paper or what didn't. But he got 14 years jail. I don't know what for.
Well, apparently he got 14. I think the charges against him was he broke the censorship rules, apparently.
Well, if he's not an editorial official, that's very difficult to break them, isn't it?
I've got to ask one last question. After the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, there is some optimism that real change is happening, but most people seem to think that genuine democracy won't really come. It'll be some kind of evolution to, let's say, a more sophisticated authoritarian structure. What do you think?
Well, most people sit on the fence and watch this game for a long time, and they're all suddenly experts about Myanmar, or Burma, as some of them call it. The fact is that this is their country. They've made a decision to move in this direction, and it wasn't an instant decision. It was these motions were put in place a long, long time ago. There was a 7-step road to democracy going back, 6 or 7 years. So this is no surprise. I mean, I think it's been going to happen. It always was going to move that way. It's just that the suddenness of the change, the rapidity of the change, and the breadth of the change is what has surprised a lot of people.
Ross Dunkley, I'm afraid we're out of time. It's fascinating to talk to you. We thank you very much for taking the time. We'll look forward to seeing the documentary on the weekend.
My pleasure.